It started like any ordinary day. A 14-year-old girl walking home from school in a quiet New Hampshire town, and then, she vanished. No screams. No witnesses. Just gone. For 9 long months, the world believed she ran away. But the truth? It was far more terrifying than anyone could imagine: abduction, isolation, and a predator who thought he'd never be caught. This is the chilling story of Abby Hernandez, and how she outsmarted the man who tried to erase her. If you're drawn to true crime stories that leave you breathless, hit subscribe now. This is only the beginning. North Conway, New Hampshire, a place where life moved slow and easy, tucked deep in the White Mountains. With its charming small-town shops, hiking trails, and friendly neighbors, it felt like nothing bad could ever happen there. People left their doors unlocked. Kids walked home from school without worry. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. A place where danger felt like something that only happened somewhere else. 14-year-old Abby Hernandez fit perfectly into this quiet, peaceful world. She was the kind of girl you'd pass on the street and smile at, not because you knew her, but because something about her was warm and familiar. She had a soft voice, long dark hair, and eyes that always seemed to be thinking. Abby wasn't loud or attention-seeking. She was thoughtful, kind, and a little shy. She lived with her mother and older sister. Their bond was tight. Her mom, Xenia, worked hard to give her girls a good life. They weren't rich, but their home was full of love. They had dinner together almost every night, laughed over silly things, and talked about school, friends, and dreams for the future. Abby wanted to be a designer one day. She loved art and had a natural talent for it. At school, Abby was well liked. She wasn't the most popular girl, but she had good friends, real ones. She was the kind of person others felt safe around. She smiled often, helped others without being asked, and tried to stay out of drama. Teachers appreciated her quiet determination. Her grades were solid, and she was looking forward to high school and everything that came with it: football games, dances, and growing up. October 9, 2013, was supposed to be just another ordinary Wednesday. Abby woke up, got dressed for school, and had breakfast like usual. She packed her bag and said goodbye to her mom with a quick hug, just like she always did. Nothing felt strange. Nothing felt off. That morning, Abby went through her school day the way she had countless times before. Classes came and went. She laughed with her friends at lunch. She planned to walk home after school, just like she always did. It was only about a mile. She'd done it 100 times. But this time, she wouldn't make it home. As the sun began to dip behind the mountains, casting a golden glow over the quiet streets, her mother started to worry. Abby hadn't called. She hadn't walked through the front door. Minutes turned into hours. Panic set in. Something was wrong. Very wrong. By nightfall, North Conway would never feel the same. What happened to Abby Hernandez on that fall afternoon would become one of the most chilling and heartbreaking cases the town, and the entire country, had ever seen. Her peaceful life, her family's sense of safety, and her small town's calm were all shattered in an instant. One moment she was just a teenage girl walking home from school. The next, she had vanished without a trace. To the outside world, Abby was just another missing teen. But to those who knew her, she was everything. A daughter. A sister. A friend. And now, she was gone. What no one could know at the time was that Abby was still alive. But her life was no longer her own. She was in the hands of someone who had planned carefully and waited patiently for the perfect moment to strike. This wasn't just a random act. It was a calculated move by a man hiding in plain sight. And Abby? She would spend the next 9 months trying to stay alive, using her mind, her instincts, and her quiet strength. She would learn how to survive fear, pain, and isolation. She would discover how far the human spirit can stretch before it breaks. But before any of that could happen, before the world would come to know her name and her incredible story, there was just Abby. A 14-year-old girl in a quiet town, living a quiet life. And then, there was silence. October 9, 2013, started off like any other school day. The morning air was crisp, and the leaves had started to fall in brilliant reds and golds along the sidewalks of North Conway. Abby Hernandez had no reason to think this Wednesday would be different. She went through her day with the same rhythm she always did, quietly, normally, peacefully. By the afternoon, classes were over. Abby slipped on her jacket, slung her backpack over one shoulder, and headed outside. She had chosen to wear a new pair of boots that day, stylish, yes, but stiff. With every step she took toward home, the leather rubbed harder against her heels. By the time she was halfway through her mile-long walk, her feet ached. The blisters had already started forming. Still, she pushed forward, not one to complain or call for a ride. Her mind wandered. She was texting her boyfriend, laughing over messages, just passing the time. Her heart felt light. She didn't know it then, but those would be the last moments of her normal life. The street was quiet. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the pavement. Abby noticed a car pull up alongside her, a dark-colored vehicle, unfamiliar. It slowed, and the window rolled down. A man inside looked at her. He didn't seem threatening. He looked older, but not old. His face was calm, his voice casual. He asked if she needed a ride. Just a simple question. Abby hesitated. She knew about stranger danger. She'd heard the warnings, read the pamphlets, sat through the school talks. Don't talk to people you don't know. Don't get in a car with a stranger. Don't trust someone just because they're friendly. But she was tired. Her feet hurt. The road stretched out long ahead of her. And the man didn't sound scary, he sounded like someone's dad. Maybe he was just being nice. Maybe he saw a girl struggling to walk and wanted to help. Abby paused for a moment, debating. She looked down the road, then back at the man. She didn't want to be rude. She didn't want to seem scared. It was just one ride. One quick lift home. So she opened the door. And stepped in. The instant she did, everything changed. She didn't even have time to process what was happening. Before she could say anything else, before she could point out where she lived, something cold and sharp pressed against her. It was a gun. The man's voice dropped. No longer kind. No longer casual. It was hard now. Flat. He told her to stay still. Told her not to scream. He meant it. Panic crashed into her like a wave. Her heart pounded in her chest. Her throat felt tight. She couldn't move. Couldn't think. This wasn't a ride home. This wasn't a helpful stranger. This was something else. Something dark. The car didn't turn toward her neighborhood. It drove away from it. Away from the town. Away from the people who could help her. The buildings grew farther apart. The trees grew taller. The silence grew louder. Abby's mind spun. How had she ended up here? How had she made that decision? She had just wanted to rest her feet. She had just wanted to be polite. She had ignored the warning bells because they were soft, too soft to drown out the pain in her boots and the innocent tone in the man's voice. Now, every instinct screamed. She didn't know his name yet. She didn't know where he was taking her. But she knew she was in danger. Real, life-changing danger. And she knew something else too. No one knew where she was. No one had seen her get into the car. No one had seen the vehicle drive away. Her last texts were casual, happy. There would be no obvious alarm right away. No immediate rescue. She was alone. Completely alone. The man kept driving. And Abby sat frozen beside him, staring ahead, too afraid to speak, too terrified to run. Her thoughts bounced between fear and survival, between wanting to scream and knowing she couldn't. Every second felt like an hour. Every turn on the road felt like another mile away from safety. What started as a normal walk home had turned into a nightmare. One moment of weakness. One painful step in the wrong shoes. One choice that made sense in the moment. And now, Abby was gone. Taken from her town. Taken from her family. Taken from everything she knew. But not broken. Not yet. This was the beginning of her ordeal. The first chapter in a story that would test her strength in ways no one could imagine. Because what waited for her at the end of that drive was far worse than she could have ever feared. Abby could still hear the sound of the tires humming on the road, the steady rhythm of a car that wasn't taking her home. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of everything, trying to find a way out of this nightmare she hadn't been prepared for. Each passing minute stretched into an eternity. The man, Nathaniel Kibbe, hadn't said much after she got in the car. His voice was calm, but there was something off about it now, something chilling that Abby couldn't quite place. She could feel the cold steel of the gun against her side, reminding her that whatever kindness she thought she'd seen before was gone. His hands gripped the wheel tightly. His eyes locked on the road, not once glancing at her. Abby couldn't breathe. Her heart pounded in her chest, as if it wanted to escape her body. She felt trapped, physically, emotionally, and mentally. She had always been taught to trust her instincts, to be aware of the world around her. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was that she was alone in a car with a stranger, miles from safety, and no one knew where she was. The world outside the car blurred as they drove farther from town. The familiar, comforting sights of North Conway faded away. The houses became sparse, then disappeared entirely. The road twisted and turned through dense forest, and the air felt heavier with each mile. Abby's thoughts raced faster now, trying to latch onto any plan, any possibility of escape. But no matter how hard she thought, nothing seemed to work. She opened her mouth, her voice shaky. "Where are we going?" Kibbe didn't answer at first. The silence in the car thickened, his face a mask of cold indifference. Finally, he spoke in a low, emotionless voice. "Just keep quiet, and everything will be fine." The words didn't reassure her. They only deepened the fear that clenched her stomach. She felt the car slow as it turned onto a narrow, winding driveway. Trees closed in around them, blocking out the fading light. A feeling of dread sank deeper in her chest. Where was he taking her? What was waiting for her at the end of this road? Then, it hit her, the terrifying realization that she was being taken somewhere remote, somewhere isolated. Somewhere no one would hear her scream. Her thoughts grew frantic. Abby knew she had to do something, anything. She could try to escape, but how? There were no other cars, no people. The road was empty, swallowed by the trees. She could barely see out the window now, the darkness closing in around them. The gun pressed against her, a constant reminder that she was powerless. Abby shifted in her seat, her body trembling. "Please let me go," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. She wanted to sound strong, but the words came out small, like a frightened child. She hated herself for it. But Kibbe didn't respond. The car lurched to a stop, and the engine cut off with a finality that seemed to echo in the silence. Abby's stomach twisted in panic. What now? Before she could move, the door was yanked open. Kibbe's hand grabbed her wrist, pulling her out of the car with surprising force. She stumbled, her legs weak, her breath shallow. The world around her felt distant and unreal. The cold air bit at her skin as she was dragged away from the car, toward an old, dilapidated building hidden in the trees. Her mind screamed for her to fight back, to scream, to do anything. But she couldn't. She had no strength left. No way out. Every instinct told her to run, but her feet refused to move. Her legs were like lead, and the fear in her chest felt like it was suffocating her. The building was a small, run-down shack, barely visible in the dark. Inside, it was cold and empty, the air stale and thick with the scent of mildew. Abby's heart hammered in her chest, and panic surged through her veins as Kibby pushed her inside. The door slammed shut behind them with a deafening thud. The darkness was absolute. Her pulse raced as her eyes strained to adjust to the low light. It was a small room, barely more than a storage space. There was nothing inside except for a few scattered objects and a filthy mattress in the corner. The air was suffocating, heavy with the smell of dust and rot. This was no mistake. He had planned this. He had been waiting for her. Abby stumbled backward, her mind whirling. This wasn't a mistake. She wasn't going to be let go. She wasn't going to be found. The panic that flooded her veins only made the terror grow stronger. She tried to fight it, to push through the fear, but it was too much. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she collapsed onto the floor. Kibby didn't say a word. He just stood there, watching her, a twisted smile playing on his lips. Abby could see the cold calculation in his eyes. He wasn't a stranger who had made a mistake. He was someone who knew exactly what he was doing. And Abby was now his prisoner. In that moment, she realized the awful truth: there was no way out. No one knew where she was. No one was coming. She was alone, trapped in a place no one would think to look. The world she once knew felt like a distant dream, and the life she had before seemed impossible. She wanted to scream. She wanted to fight. But all that remained was the heavy weight of fear, settling over her like a dark cloud, smothering her hope. Abby was in his grip now. And there was no telling when, or if, she would ever escape. Abby Hernandez's life had been turned upside down in an instant. One moment she had been walking home from school, laughing with a friend over text messages, and the next, she was in a place she could never have imagined. A cold, dark, metal box, cramped, suffocating, and completely devoid of warmth or humanity. A place where light never fully reached, where time stretched out painfully, and where the line between day and night blurred into nothingness. The shipping container was nothing like the home she had left behind. It was cold, damp, and filthy. The air was thick with the smell of rust and mildew, and the floor was covered in dirt and grime. There were no windows, no signs of life, no sound except the occasional creak of metal and the distant rumble of cars driving far away. The walls pressed in on her, enclosing her in a tight, suffocating space, and she couldn't remember how many days had passed since she'd been taken. Nathaniel Kibby had turned the shipping container into her prison. There were no comforting voices to break the silence. No family to search for her. No friends to call her name. Only Kibby. The man who had taken her. The man who controlled everything about her life now. In the darkest depths of captivity, when every ounce of Abby's hope seemed drained from her, something remarkable happened. It was in the silence of that filthy shipping container, where time no longer seemed to exist, that Abby began to build an unlikely and fragile strategy for survival. Her body might have been trapped, but her mind, the one thing Kibby couldn't fully control, remained her only weapon. Abby wasn't naive enough to think she could fight her way out of this. She knew that she was completely at the mercy of her captor. The idea of physical escape was distant, almost impossible. The container was her prison, Kibby her warden. But what Abby did have was her ability to think, to strategize, and, most importantly, her understanding of human behavior. Nathaniel Kibby, for all his cruelty and control, was still human. And like any human, he craved some form of connection, some recognition of his power. Abby knew that if she could navigate his emotions, if she could play to his ego, she might have a chance of staying alive. It wasn't a game of defiance, it was a game of subtle survival. Abby quickly realized that one of the most effective ways to protect herself was by minimizing Kibby's anger. His mood was volatile, at times calm and detached, and at other times, explosively violent. She had learned early on that the slightest provocation could lead to brutal punishment. But she also began to notice something else: he wasn't always as sure of himself as he appeared. He, too, seemed to need her in some twisted way, her compliance, her submission. The key, Abby understood, was to keep him feeling in control, to appease him, to act in a way that convinced him she was no threat. There were days when Kibby would lock her away in the container and leave her alone for hours. In those moments of solitude, Abby allowed herself to experience the full weight of her emotions: fear, rage, sorrow, but only in brief moments. She never allowed herself to fully break. She had to remain emotionally steady, to keep a level head, even when it seemed like everything inside her was shattering. Her greatest challenge, however, was when he was there, right in front of her. When Kibby would enter the container, Abby's survival instinct kicked in. She would hold her breath, calm her racing heart, and force herself to smile, subtly, cautiously. She wasn't smiling out of joy. It was a smile of compliance, of control. She would speak softly, choosing her words carefully. She didn't want to anger him, but she didn't want to appear completely broken either. She found ways to flatter him, to tell him what he wanted to hear. She would tell him things like, "You're the only person who's been kind to me, and I know I can't survive without you." It was sickening to her, but she had learned to mask her disgust, to play the role of a docile captive. She had learned the power of manipulation, not to hurt him, but to keep herself safe. Sometimes, it worked. Kibby's aggression would lessen, his temper would cool. He would lower the intensity of his threats, the violence would subside for a short while, and he would leave her in peace, even if just for a day or two. In those moments, Abby would breathe deeply, her heart racing with both relief and fear. Every time she managed to avoid a violent outburst, it felt like a small victory. A victory, however fleeting, in a place that had been designed to strip her of everything. Her emotions, though ever present, were controlled in a way that was almost mechanical. She didn't allow herself to dwell on the despair. She couldn't. There were times when Abby would wake in the middle of the night, unable to remember whether it was still day or night, unable to tell how long she had been trapped inside the container. The air was thick, suffocating, and she could feel the walls closing in on her mind. But rather than giving in to panic, Abby started to focus on something simple: small victories. The moments where she had managed to avoid his wrath. The rare times he would offer her a bit of food, or let her take a long, slow walk outside in the woods. These small scraps of normalcy were enough to remind her that she wasn't completely forgotten. In these moments, she clung to the idea of escape, not the physical kind, which felt increasingly impossible, but the mental kind. She began to strategize. If she kept her mind sharp, if she held on to the fragments of who she once was, she could survive. She would practice the art of patience, learning to read Kibby's moods, to anticipate his needs and moods. In a sense, she was learning to survive in the only way she could, by playing his game better than he played hers. She found ways to keep her body strong. She would exercise in the small, cramped space, forcing herself to stay physically healthy. It was a survival instinct she had developed over time. She couldn't let her body deteriorate. That would be the first step to giving up. Mentally, she would recreate the world she had lost. She would remember the sounds of her mother's voice, the warmth of her father's hug, the laughter of her friends. In the quiet moments of the night, when Kibby was gone, she would close her eyes and imagine their faces, their love, the comfort of home. She would cling to those memories like a lifeline, using them to push back the dark thoughts that threatened to consume her. The most powerful weapon she had, however, was her ability to convince Kibby that she was useful to him. He needed her compliance. He needed her to believe he had control, even when he didn't. Abby's survival, in those long months, depended on her ability to convince him that she had no other options. She wasn't rebellious. She wasn't a threat. She was simply a girl who had no choice but to stay alive. By keeping him believing she was his victim, Abby ensured her place in the cruel cycle of captivity. And through it all, she held on to one final truth: she would survive. Even when it seemed impossible, even when her world had become nothing but the rusted metal walls of the container, Abby held on to the spark of hope that one day, someone would find her. That thought, that tiny seed of hope, was what kept her mentally and emotionally alive. It was the only thing Kibbe couldn't take from her. Abby's world had become a twisted game of survival, a careful balancing act of compliance, manipulation, and waiting. But even as she tried to stay strong, even as she clung to the hope that one day someone would find her, Nathaniel Kibbe devised a new and chilling way to control her: a letter. The letter would change everything. It would mislead the authorities, throw off any investigation, and prolong her torment. It was a diabolical plan, a part of Kibbe's sick manipulation to keep the world from looking too closely at the truth. Kibbe had already made it clear that Abby wasn't allowed to contact her family, wasn't allowed to reach out to anyone who might notice she was gone. Her entire existence was now confined to the cold, metal walls of the shipping container and the unpredictable whims of her captor. But then, one day, he made a demand that shook Abby to her core. "You're going to write a letter," he said, his voice flat and cold. "A letter to your mother. You're going to tell her that you ran away. That you chose this. That you're fine. And that you're not coming back." Abby's heart sank. She had known it was coming, the moment when she would be forced to take part in the lie, to somehow help perpetuate the illusion that she had chosen to disappear. She had already been coerced into complying with so much: his commands, his violence, his twisted control. But this felt like the ultimate betrayal. She was being made to deceive her own mother, the one person who had loved her unconditionally. The very thought of writing those words made her stomach churn. How could she possibly do this? How could she lie to the one person who had always been there for her? And yet, there was no choice. Kibbe stood over her, his presence looming. "You will write it," he repeated, the threat in his voice unmistakable. The air in the shipping container felt suffocating as Abby sat there, the pen in her trembling hand. She stared at the blank piece of paper in front of her, unable to stop the tears that blurred her vision. The words Kibbe had forced her to say echoed in her mind: "Tell her you're fine. Tell her you ran away." But Abby knew she couldn't just write a letter, sign her name, and pretend that everything was okay. She had to make it sound convincing. She had to play her part in his sick game. With a deep, shuddering breath, she began. Her hand moved across the paper, writing each word with a mix of despair and numbness, her soul slowly withering with each sentence. She wrote, "Dear Mom. I'm okay. Please don't worry about me. I've made my decision, and I'm going to be fine. I know you'll miss me, but I need to do this for myself. I've decided to leave. And won't be coming back. Please don't try to find me. This is my choice. I love you, but this is the best thing for me right now. Don't blame yourself. I'm happy. Don't look for me. I'll be okay. Love, Abby." As Abby set down the pen, her stomach turned. The letter wasn't just a lie, it was a complete betrayal of everything she had ever known. But she also knew that the longer Kibbe kept her locked away, the more power he held over her. The longer the authorities believed she had run away, the longer they would be looking in the wrong direction. It was his way of making sure she was invisible, of keeping her out of reach. The lie would obscure the truth, giving him more time to control her, more time to manipulate the investigation. For a moment, Abby wondered if anyone would ever believe the letter. If they would truly think she had willingly disappeared. She remembered the disbelief in her mother's eyes when she first realized Abby was gone, the desperate search that followed. Would they understand? Would they see through the lie, or would they assume that Abby had chosen this life for herself? She didn't know. The truth was, she couldn't bear the thought that her mother would read those words and think her daughter had willingly left, that she had chosen to cut ties with everything she had known and loved. Abby knew better than anyone that the truth was far darker. But for now, she was powerless to stop it. She had no choice but to comply. Kibby took the letter from her hands, his eyes scanning the words as if he were inspecting his handiwork. Satisfied, he nodded, the ghost of a smile flickering at the edges of his lips. "Perfect," he said. "Now, we'll just let the police think you ran away. They'll look in the wrong places. They'll be too busy searching for a runaway girl to find a captive one." Abby couldn't respond. She just sat there, feeling the weight of the lie crush her chest, feeling the chains of her captivity tighten. The letter wasn't just a message for her mother, it was a way for Kibby to secure his grip on her, to keep the world from seeing her as she truly was, a girl held against her will, a victim of a crime that no one seemed to be able to uncover. Her heart ached for Xenia Hernandez, her mother, who would never understand the truth behind those words. Abby couldn't bear the thought of the pain her mother would feel, of believing that her daughter had chosen to leave her behind. And yet, deep down, Abby knew that the lie was her only chance of survival. As much as it tore at her soul, it was the only way to survive another day in Kibby's twisted world. But even with the lies, even with the manipulation, one thing remained, Abby's unwavering hope that one day, someone would see through the deception. Someone would come for her. Until then, she would wait. And she would survive. 9 months. 9 long, agonizing months of confinement, fear, and manipulation. Every day had blurred into the next in that suffocating metal box, a constant cycle of dread, compliance, and fleeting hope. But as much as Abby had been conditioned to survive in that dark, cold shipping container, nothing could have prepared her for the day Kibby made an unexpected decision, a decision that would change everything. It came without warning, like a crack in a dam that had held strong for so long. One day, Nathaniel Kibby simply told her, "You're leaving." Abby didn't understand at first. The words didn't make sense. There had been no indication, no sign that Kibby would ever let her go. She had long ago stopped hoping for a chance to escape, let alone for him to simply release her. Her life had become a delicate dance of survival, waiting for the moment when he would tire of her or when the authorities would finally close in. But now, in an instant, everything had shifted. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She was numb, her mind still processing the words. Kibby didn't offer a clear explanation. Instead, he just shrugged and said, "It's over. You can go." But Abby couldn't fully comprehend the finality of it. The release was surreal, a cruel twist of fate that she hadn't expected. Her body felt disconnected from her mind, as if the years of isolation had made her forget what it meant to be free. But the truth was undeniable, Kibby, in his sick and twisted way, was letting her go. And it was the most unexpected, and terrifying, thing to happen in her long months of captivity. In the days leading up to her release, Abby had felt an odd shift in Kibby's behavior. The tension that once hung heavy in the air had lightened. He seemed to be growing more distant, more erratic. He didn't come to her container as frequently, and when he did, he seemed almost resigned, as if something inside him had changed. It was as though, for the first time since her abduction, he was beginning to lose control over her. Abby tried to make sense of it. Was he tired of her? Had he grown bored? Was the reality of the situation finally catching up to him? The days spent in the container had broken her physically, but it was his control over her mind that had been the most devastating. She had been a prisoner of his manipulation for so long that the thought of freedom now felt almost as dangerous as the captivity itself. The final interaction between them was jarring, disorienting. Kibby didn't even say goodbye. He just unlocked the door of the shipping container, stepped aside, and gestured for her to leave. There was no explanation, no final manipulation. There was no threat of violence or punishment, no command to stay silent or comply. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was left to make her own choice. Abby hesitated. Her body was frail, weak from months of confinement, but her mind raced. She could hear the blood pounding in her ears, feel her chest tightening with a mixture of fear and disbelief. This was it. For. But it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like a precipice. She stepped out slowly, testing the world outside, as though expecting the walls of the shipping container to close in again at any moment. The air smelled different, fresh, almost too fresh. The trees, the sky, the ground beneath her feet, it all felt so vast, so overwhelming after the small, suffocating space she had spent so long in. But the fear wasn't gone. It hadn't vanished in the face of her newfound freedom. She still feared him, still feared the possibility of retribution. Kibbe didn't follow her. He stood in the doorway, watching as she stepped further into the world. His eyes, cold, emotionless, locked onto hers for a brief moment, and then, without another word, he turned and walked away. The door to the container closed with a loud clang, echoing through the silence of the woods. Abby stood frozen in place, unsure of what to do next. Was this a trick? Was it some kind of sick joke to make her believe she was free, only to have him come back and drag her into a new form of torment? She could barely process the reality of it. Her mind was still trapped in the rhythms of captivity, the quiet, the isolation, the constant fear. But slowly, the overwhelming sense of powerlessness began to shift. She took one cautious step forward, then another, until she found herself moving in a direction she had not thought possible in months, away from the container. Her feet carried her, though the fear clung to her every step. Would Kibbe follow her? Would he come after her? She looked over her shoulder, expecting to see him emerge from the trees at any moment. But there was nothing. The woods were empty. Silent. And then, almost without thinking, Abby began to run. She ran as fast as her weakened body would allow, her feet stumbling over the rough terrain, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She didn't know where she was going, didn't care. All she knew was that she needed to get away. It wasn't until she stumbled onto a road and saw a car passing by that reality finally hit. She was free. She had escaped. But she wasn't sure how to process it. The weight of the months spent in captivity still pressed on her chest, suffocating her with memories of fear and manipulation. The thought of running to the authorities seemed like the next logical step, but a fresh wave of panic overtook her. Would Kibbe come for her? Would he try to hunt her down? She could still feel his presence, looming, even in her escape. But there was no time for hesitation. She had survived. She had to keep moving forward. Abby flagged down the car, her hand trembling. The driver stopped, and without a word, Abby climbed inside, her voice barely above a whisper as she said, "Please, I need help. I've been kidnapped." The journey to freedom had begun, but even as Abby sat in that car, her heart racing with the shock of everything that had just happened, she realized that the real challenge was just beginning. The world she was about to re-enter would never be the same. And neither would she. For weeks after her release, Abby Hernandez remained trapped in a silence that was as suffocating as the shipping container where she had been held. The world had changed in an instant, but she hadn't yet caught up. The emotions that swirled inside her were raw, unprocessed, a whirlwind of relief, fear, and confusion. She was finally free, but it didn't feel like it. It felt like the aftermath of an explosion, with pieces of herself scattered everywhere, each fragment heavy with the weight of her captivity. Abby's first instinct was to protect her mother, Xenia. She had gone through hell to bring Abby home, and Abby couldn't bear the thought of her being dragged into the nightmare again. The very idea of her mother reliving the horror of those 9 months, of hearing the brutal details of her daughter's suffering, was almost too much to bear. So Abby remained silent, unwilling to speak about what had truly happened. It was as if the words were locked in a cage deep inside her, too dangerous to let loose. But the silence came with its own cost. Each day, the weight of her secret grew heavier. She knew that the world, the people who had searched for her, were waiting for answers. They needed to know what had happened, who had taken her, why she had been gone for so long. Yet, Abby couldn't bring herself to share the truth, not yet. The trauma was too fresh, too raw, and the fear of reprisal from Kibbe lingered like a shadow over her. It wasn't until a series of events forced her hand that Abby found her voice. The police investigation into her disappearance had been relentless, and it didn't take long for them to piece together that her abduction wasn't a simple case of a runaway teenager, it was something far darker. As the investigation gained momentum, the search for Nathaniel Kibbe intensified. But Abby remained silent, still locked in the cocoon of fear and guilt. The idea of talking to the police, of reliving the horror, felt impossible. But slowly, as the weeks passed, Abby's strength began to return. She was surrounded by a team of professionals, therapists, and loved ones who helped her navigate the emotional labyrinth she was trapped in. They didn't push her, they understood that healing was a slow process. But one day, something shifted inside Abby. She realized that her silence wasn't just protecting her mother anymore. It was keeping her in a prison of her own. If she was ever going to heal, she needed to speak out. The decision wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy. The memories of Kibbe's manipulation, the constant threats, and the way he had broken her down still haunted her. But she found the courage to speak when she realized that her story could help others. It wasn't just about her, it was about ensuring that what happened to her didn't happen to someone else. She had survived for a reason, and that reason was to make sure others understood the signs, the dangers, the reality of what could happen in a world where monsters like Kibbe lurked in plain sight. The day she finally spoke to the police was a turning point. Her voice, though shaky at first, was steady as she recounted the details of her abduction. She spoke of the lies Kibbe had fed her, the way he had controlled her with fear, and the way he had manipulated her into thinking that escape wasn't possible. She spoke of her moments of resistance, the small victories that had allowed her to maintain her will to survive. And then came the arrest of Nathaniel Kibbe. The police had already been building a case, and Abby's testimony became the final piece they needed to bring him to justice. His arrest was swift, and the moment it happened, Abby could feel a strange sense of relief wash over her. Kibbe was no longer a shadow in her life. But even as his capture marked the end of one chapter, Abby knew that the journey ahead would be long and complicated. The media attention that followed was overwhelming. Her story was splashed across news outlets, on the front pages of newspapers, and across every social media platform. Everyone wanted to know her story, to understand what had happened, to hear from the girl who had been held captive for so long and then returned, broken but alive. The pressure was relentless. Abby had never been prepared for this kind of public scrutiny. The attention was suffocating, and every retelling of her story felt like an assault on her psyche. She had lived through the horror, but now, every reporter, every camera, every article seemed to pull her back into the nightmare, forcing her to relive every painful detail for the world to see. But as difficult as it was, Abby pushed through. She spoke out, not for herself, but for others who were still trapped in their own silent prisons. She used her platform to raise awareness about kidnapping, to speak about the dangers that lurked in the shadows, and to show that survival was possible, even in the darkest of circumstances. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of everything seemed unbearable. But with each interview, each appearance, Abby began to heal. The more she shared her story, the more she reclaimed her power. As the weeks and months passed, Abby's healing process was slow, but steady. Therapy helped her work through the trauma, and the support of her family, friends, and advocates gave her the strength to keep moving forward. There were days when the memories still haunted her, when the flashbacks threatened to swallow her whole. But with each passing day, Abby grew stronger. The young girl who had once been held captive in a shipping container had transformed into a survivor, a fierce, brave young woman who had found her voice and was using it to fight for others. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a beacon of hope. Abby's journey wasn't over, and she knew that healing would take time. But with every step she took toward reclaiming her life, she proved that even the darkest chapters of a person's story could lead to a brighter, stronger future. And as she continued to speak out, Abby became a symbol of courage, not just for those who had been through what she had, but for anyone who had ever been silenced by fear. In the end, her bravery wasn't just in surviving, it was in choosing to live, to speak, and to inspire others to do the same. The road to justice is never as simple as it seems. For 9 months, the authorities had been relentless in their search for Abby Hernandez, following every lead, questioning every potential witness, and piecing together the fragments of a mystery that seemed to grow darker with each passing day. But finding Nathaniel Kibbe, the man responsible for her abduction, was far from straightforward. It wasn't just the complexity of the case that made it difficult, it was the eerie calm with which Kibbe had carried out his crime, the meticulous way in which he had hidden his tracks. At first, the investigation had struggled to break ground. Abby's disappearance had all the hallmarks of a typical missing person case, except it wasn't typical at all. No ransom demands, no threats or phone calls, and no known motive. Her family was distraught, law enforcement officers were frustrated, and the community was on edge. But over time, small clues began to surface. The first breakthrough came when Abby was found. She had been held in a shipping container on Kibbe's isolated property, hidden away from the world. It was in that moment that the investigation shifted gears. Abby's sudden appearance, though miraculous, brought with it a flood of new questions. And most importantly, it provided the police with the key to unlocking the mystery, her testimony. Abby's account of what had happened during those harrowing months was crucial. While she had been hesitant to speak at first, when she did, her memory of the details she had endured became the cornerstone of the investigation. She spoke about Kibbe's face, his demeanor, the car he drove, and most significantly, the property where he had kept her. Her description of the isolated area, along with specific details about his behavior and the psychological manipulation he had used, pointed investigators in the right direction. But it was more than just Abby's testimony that led to Kibbe's eventual arrest. Law enforcement had already been collecting evidence in the wake of Abby's disappearance, hoping that something, anything, would lead them to her captor. A breakthrough came when they began examining local surveillance footage. Police were able to trace the route that Kibbe's car had taken the day Abby was abducted. The footage from nearby stores, gas stations, and traffic cameras was pieced together, painting a clear picture of the movements of a man who seemed to be deliberately evading detection. Investigators soon realized that Kibbe's secluded property, located in a remote area of New Hampshire, had been the perfect hiding place. It was far enough from prying eyes, yet close enough to the community to remain under the radar. They also began searching for a link between Kibbe and Abby's case. It turned out that Kibbe had crossed paths with Abby before. In a chilling twist, it was discovered that Kibbe had been in the vicinity of Abby's school on the day of her abduction, an encounter that had, at the time, seemed innocuous. But when combined with the rest of the evidence, this connection suddenly became a key piece of the puzzle. The breakthrough, however, didn't come until police zeroed in on Kibbe himself. A series of interviews with family members, neighbors, and co-workers revealed disturbing patterns in his behavior. He had lived alone, keeping to himself, and often made strange, evasive comments about young women and the disappearances of other people in the area. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. With enough circumstantial evidence pointing to Kibbe, police obtained a warrant to search his property. What they found was shocking: a meticulously concealed shipping container, hidden among the trees, which matched Abby's description down to the last detail. Inside, there were personal items that had once belonged to Abby, proof that she had indeed been held captive there. But the investigation didn't stop there. As investigators pieced together the timeline of events, they uncovered more disturbing truths about Kibbe's past. He had a history of criminal behavior, though not specifically related to kidnapping. But it was clear now that his actions were not random. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime. This was the work of a man who had been planning, manipulating, and controlling his victim for months, slowly breaking her down with the kind of psychological torment that left its scars far deeper than any physical wounds. When Kibbe was finally arrested, the moment was a mix of relief and disbelief. Law enforcement officials had worked tirelessly to build their case, and it was a long-awaited victory. But even as Kibbe was taken into custody, the haunting question remained: why? What had driven him to commit such a horrific act? And how had he been able to keep his secret for so long? The arrest itself was swift. Early one morning, police surrounded Kibbe's property and took him into custody without incident. His arrest was as cold and calculated as his crime had been. He didn't show remorse. He didn't offer an explanation. He simply complied, his expression unreadable as he was escorted to the police car. With his arrest, the legal proceedings began. The investigation had already laid the groundwork for a strong case, but bringing him to trial would require Abby to step forward once again, to face the man who had stolen her life for 9 months and reveal the details of her torment to the world. As the trial approached, the legal proceedings began. The investigation had already laid the groundwork for a strong case, but bringing him to trial would require Abby to step forward once again, to face the man who had stolen her life for 9 months and reveal the details of her torment to the world. As the trial approached, the legal team faced significant challenges. Kibbe's defense team attempted to paint him as a victim of circumstances, but the overwhelming evidence of his premeditated actions and the weight of Abby's testimony made it clear that his manipulation and control over her had been deliberate. The courtroom was filled with tension, the air thick with emotion as Abby bravely faced her abductor, showing the world that she would no longer allow him to control her narrative. Kibbe was eventually found guilty of multiple charges, including kidnapping, assault, and coercion. His sentencing was a grim reminder of the justice system's ability to hold those who commit unspeakable acts accountable, even when their victims are left in the shadows, fighting for their voices to be heard. In the aftermath, Abby's bravery was recognized not only in the courtroom but by communities around the world. Her courage to speak out, to stand up in the face of overwhelming fear, played an integral role in ensuring that Kibbe would never harm anyone again. Justice had been served, but it was not without its scars. For Abby, the road to healing was just beginning. The trial of Nathaniel Kibbe was more than just a legal proceeding. It was a battle for justice, a battle that felt deeply personal to Abby Hernandez and her family. The courtroom, filled with hushed whispers and heavy tension, bore witness to a drama far more painful than any legal argument could convey. It was the culmination of nearly a year of unimaginable suffering for Abby, and for the community that had watched her transformation from a missing teen to a courageous survivor. The emotional weight of it all hung heavily in the air, making each day of the trial feel like an eternity. For Abby, sitting in that courtroom was nothing short of excruciating. Every moment felt like a step back into the nightmare she had fought so hard to escape. The walls of the courtroom, while not as suffocating as the shipping container that had been her prison, nonetheless carried their own kind of weight, the eyes of strangers, the questions, the constant reminders of what she had endured. It was as if every word spoken, every argument made, threatened to pull her back into the trauma, to force her to relive the horror. Yet, she knew that facing her captor in court, confronting him with her truth, was an essential part of her healing. It was the final chapter in her journey from victim to survivor. The prosecution laid out a meticulous case, one that detailed every horrific moment of Abby's abduction, captivity, and psychological torment. They presented the evidence, the surveillance footage, the traces of Kibbe's movements, the chilling items found on his property, and, of course, Abby's powerful testimony. Every piece of evidence painted the picture of a man who had planned and executed a deliberate, calculated crime, someone who had kept a 14-year-old girl imprisoned for months, manipulating her with fear and violence, breaking her spirit piece by piece. The prosecution also emphasized the psychological damage Kibbe had inflicted on Abby, how he had shattered her sense of safety, trust, and autonomy. They painted him not as a man who had simply made a mistake, but as someone who had deliberately chosen to exploit a vulnerable child, using every tool at his disposal to control and silence her. Kibbe's defense team, however, attempted to portray him in a different light. They argued that he had been disturbed and misguided, seeking to shift blame from his own actions to some external force or condition. They tried to frame his behavior as something that could be excused or explained away, suggesting that his past and his alleged mental health issues played a role in his choices. But the prosecution was quick to dismantle these claims, showing that Kibbe's actions were not impulsive or driven by some deep-seated disorder, but rather a carefully calculated series of steps designed to control Abby and keep her isolated from the world. The defense tried to undermine Abby's testimony, suggesting that she might have exaggerated or misunderstood her own experience. They attempted to cast doubt on the details she had recalled, questioning the accuracy of her memories and attempting to paint her as unreliable. But Abby's strength, her unwavering commitment to telling her truth, shone through in those moments. She didn't falter. She didn't shrink from their attacks. Instead, she faced them with the same courage that had helped her survive her captivity. As the trial unfolded, it became clear to everyone in the courtroom that the emotional stakes were as high as the legal ones. The Hernandez family, though steeled by the support of their community, could not escape the weight of what was happening. Xenia Hernandez, Abby's mother, sat beside her daughter every day, offering quiet support. But even she couldn't fully shield Abby from the emotional toll the trial took. Each day, the pieces of her daughter's suffering were laid bare, and though they were fighting for justice, the cost was incalculable. The community of North Conway, where Abby had once been just another teenager attending school and walking home with her friends, watched anxiously. They had known her as the bright, lively girl who had never shown signs of danger, never given anyone reason to think she was at risk. And now, they were forced to confront the brutal reality of what could happen in a seemingly peaceful town. The trial exposed not just the horror of Abby's abduction, but also the vulnerability of the world around them, a world that could no longer be taken for granted. As the defense presented its closing arguments and the prosecution delivered its final, impassioned plea for justice, the jury deliberated. The room was thick with anticipation. And then, after what felt like an eternity, the verdict came. Nathaniel Kibbe was found guilty on all counts. Kidnapping, assault, coercion. The charges were as clear and indisputable as the evidence against him. There was no escape for him. No way out. He had been caught, and now, he would face the full weight of his actions. The moment the verdict was read, there was an almost unbearable release of tension in the courtroom. For Abby and her family, it was a victory, but it wasn't a complete one. The emotional toll of what had transpired, the trial, the exposure, the public scrutiny, had already left its mark. Kibbe's conviction meant that he would be imprisoned for the rest of his life, but the scars he had left on Abby's soul were not so easily erased. Abby herself, though relieved by the verdict, felt the mixture of emotions that come with such a momentous event. There was satisfaction, yes. The man who had done such terrible things to her would never hurt anyone again. But there was also sorrow, the kind that lingers in the aftermath of trauma. Her life, her sense of safety, had been irrevocably altered. No amount of justice could return her to the person she had been before her abduction. Yet, in the midst of her quiet relief, there was also a sense of closure. The man who had taken her, who had manipulated and broken her, was finally held accountable for his actions. And as the weight of that realization settled in, Abby began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time, the faintest glimmer of peace. It wasn't enough to undo the damage that had been done, but it was a step toward healing, a step toward reclaiming her life. Kibbe's conviction had been a victory, not just for Abby, but for all who had watched her fight for her freedom. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of circumstances, justice could be found, and the pursuit of it could bring light to the most hopeless of situations. For Abby, the trial marked the end of one chapter. But the journey to healing, though it had only just begun, would be one that she would face with strength, resilience, and the unshakable courage of a survivor. The aftermath of Abby Hernandez's harrowing ordeal was a journey of darkness, uncertainty, and incredible courage. When the nightmare of her abduction was over, and Nathaniel Kibbe was behind bars, the road to recovery stretched out before her. It was not a path of immediate healing or quick solutions, but one that required patience, self-compassion, and the quiet strength to face the scars, both seen and unseen, that would remain long after the physical wounds had healed. In the months following her release, Abby faced a battle that was far more subtle, and in many ways more profound, than the battle for her freedom. The emotional and psychological effects of her captivity were all-consuming. The trauma of her 9 months in isolation, subjected to manipulation and control, left deep scars. Like so many survivors of abduction, Abby struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. The panic attacks, the intrusive memories, the overwhelming feelings of fear and helplessness, these were all part of the invisible chains that bound her, long after the physical ones had been removed. But Abby was not alone in her fight. Her family, especially her mother, Xenia, stood by her every step of the way, offering a steady, unwavering source of love and support. Xenia became not only a pillar of strength for Abby but also a source of advocacy, speaking out about the need for support systems for families of crime victims. Xenia's support allowed Abby to feel safe enough to begin processing her trauma, something that would take time but was essential in her healing process. In the early days of her recovery, Abby attended therapy, learning how to navigate the psychological landscape left by her captivity. She was guided by professionals who understood the long-lasting effects of trauma and helped her make sense of the feelings of shame, guilt, and fear that plagued her. It wasn't an easy journey. There were days when Abby felt overwhelmed by the weight of her memories, days when the pain seemed unbearable. Yet, slowly and surely, she began to rebuild her sense of self. One of the most difficult aspects of Abby's recovery was finding ways to live in a world that, for 9 months, had seemed foreign and hostile. It was not enough to simply escape from the physical confinement of the shipping container. Abby had to relearn how to interact with the world around her, how to trust others, and how to believe in the goodness of people again. Simple things, like walking into a room full of strangers or hearing a car approach on a quiet street, could trigger feelings of anxiety and panic. But with time, and with the support of her therapist and family, Abby began to rediscover the joys of life, the simple pleasures that had been stolen from her. Her connection with her friends, though initially strained, began to heal as well. Though many of them struggled to understand the depths of her pain, they too rallied around her, offering their presence and encouragement. Abby's recovery was not linear. There were setbacks, moments when she felt as though she was taking one step forward only to be pulled 2 steps back. But each day, she grew stronger. Slowly, she learned to find joy in small moments, whether it was spending time with her family, cooking a meal, or walking through her neighborhood again. Every positive experience, no matter how small, was a victory. It was a reminder that life, even after trauma, could still offer moments of beauty and peace. As Abby began to heal, she also began to speak out. Her voice, once silenced by fear and captivity, now carried a new purpose. She became an advocate for victims of abduction and trauma, using her story to raise awareness and help others who were facing similar battles. Abby's bravery in sharing her experience was a testament to her strength and her unwavering belief in the power of hope. Her message was clear: no matter how dark the road ahead may seem, there is always a path to recovery, always a way forward. "I'm not the person I was before," Abby said in an interview. "But I'm still here. And I'm still fighting. If my story can help someone else, if it can show them that they're not alone, then that's enough." In the years following her recovery, Abby worked tirelessly to support others, speaking at events, participating in support groups, and using her platform to advocate for better resources for survivors. She talked about PTSD, the long-term effects of captivity, and the need for a supportive community. She became an example of resilience, someone who had taken the worst experience of her life and used it to fuel her fight for others. "Survivors are not defined by what happened to them," Abby said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "We are defined by what we do after. How we heal. How we rise. And how we help others do the same." Abby's advocacy extended beyond her personal recovery. She worked to educate the public on the psychological effects of abduction, emphasizing that healing is a long, slow process that requires time, patience, and a strong support system. She encouraged others to reach out, to ask for help, and to not let shame or fear stop them from seeking the care they needed. Through all of this, Abby also began to reclaim the joys of life that she had once known. She graduated from high school, went on to pursue a college degree, and, most importantly, she began to rebuild her dreams, dreams that had once been shattered in the face of unimaginable fear. Her future, though uncertain, was once again filled with possibility. Abby's journey wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving, despite the trauma. It was about using the lessons she had learned to help others, to transform her pain into something powerful. Her story became a beacon of hope, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It showed that, even in the darkest of times, healing was possible. Abby Hernandez, once a victim, had become a voice for the voiceless, a symbol of the strength it takes to rise from the ashes of trauma and to rebuild one's life. And through it all, Abby's greatest message remained clear: no matter what happens, never lose hope. Healing is a journey, and even the most broken of us can find our way back to the light. Abby Hernandez's journey from victim to survivor is nothing short of extraordinary. Her story is one of unimaginable suffering, yet it is also a testament to the boundless strength of the human spirit, the power of resilience, and the incredible courage that lies within even the most vulnerable. What began as a nightmare of captivity, fear, and manipulation ultimately transformed into a story of hope, healing, and empowerment. Throughout her ordeal, Abby never lost the flicker of hope that, despite the darkness, she could find her way out. She faced terrifying moments where escape seemed impossible, yet she refused to let the trauma define her. Her ability to endure, to survive, and ultimately to thrive is a reflection of a resilience that can't be measured by the scale of the horror she faced, but by the indomitable will that propelled her forward, one small victory at a time. Today, Abby stands as a beacon of hope for survivors everywhere, showing them that healing is possible even after the most harrowing of experiences. She demonstrates the power of reclaiming one's life, of transforming pain into strength, and of using one's story to not only heal but to help others. Her decision to share her truth, to speak out about the trauma she endured, was not just an act of bravery, it was a gift to those who have suffered in silence, a reminder that they too can find their voice and their way back to hope. Abby's strength is reflected in the way she has used her experience to educate and empower others. By speaking about her own trauma, she helps to raise awareness about the long-term psychological effects of abduction and captivity. She shares survival strategies, offering a roadmap for others who may find themselves facing unimaginable circumstances. Her advocacy serves not only as a guide to survivors, but also as a tool for prevention, educating the public about the dangers of abduction and the importance of teaching children, families, and communities how to protect themselves. Her message is clear and unwavering: you are not defined by the worst thing that has happened to you. Your pain does not have to be your prison. Through Abby's story, the world has come to understand that healing is a journey, not a destination, and that even in the face of insurmountable odds, survival is possible. Abby now carries with her a wisdom born of hardship, a wisdom that goes beyond the lessons taught in textbooks or classrooms. It is the wisdom of someone who has learned the true value of inner strength, the importance of community, and the power of never giving up, even when the road ahead seems insurmountable. She has proven, in the most profound way possible, that it's not the tragedy that defines you, but how you rise from it. To the world, Abby is a survivor. But to herself, she is more than that. She is a living testament to the fact that, no matter how dark the journey, there is always the possibility of finding the light. Every step Abby takes forward is not just a victory for her, but for all who have been broken and rebuilt by life's cruelties. Her courage, her strength, and her unwavering hope are qualities that will inspire generations to come. Abby's journey isn't just hers alone. It belongs to all of us who have faced trials, who have faced the darkness and yet found a way to keep moving forward. It belongs to every survivor who has ever felt lost, to every person who has ever questioned their ability to heal. Abby Hernandez's story reminds us that we all have the capacity to survive, to reclaim our lives, and to help others do the same. In sharing her story, Abby not only helps prevent future tragedies but also serves as a powerful reminder: no matter what happens to you, no matter how broken you feel, you can rise again. The strength to heal, to rebuild, and to thrive is within us all. It may take time, it may take tears, but the journey toward freedom, toward a life that is no longer defined by trauma, is always possible. Abby's message to us all is simple, yet profound: survivors are not born, they are made. And no matter how difficult the path, the power to overcome is within us all. As she continues to heal, grow, and share her story with the world, Abby Hernandez reminds us that no matter how dark the past may be, the future still holds a world of possibility. Her courage is a light in the darkness, and through her strength, others are finding their way back to hope.